Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Raj Sabharwal. I'm one of the founding partners of Glass Revolution Imports, and we have the honor and privilege to be the U.S. importers of Waterford Irish Single Malt. And I am thrilled to be joined today by founder and CEO of Waterford, Mark Reynier. I'll introduce Mark in a second, and Ned Gahan. I got that right today, right, Ned?
That's right, yeah.
Who is head of distilling. So Mark Reynier, many of you probably know him by reputation, if not in person, but he's celebrating 40 years in the drinks industry this year, believe it or not. 20 years in the wine side, and then the last 20 years on the distilled spirits side, most notably for having restarted Bruichladdich in 2000, and then carried that forward in 2012. It was sold to Remy Cointreau, and then Mark had a chance to buy the former Guinness Brewery in Waterford in 2014, transforming to a state-of-art into a modern distillery. And most recently, and he's joining us from Grenada, where he started a new rum distillery that just starting to operate. So Mark will fill us in a bit. And we're joined by Ned Gahan, who is the head of distilling at Waterford. Ned has a long history, 20 years at the former Guinness Brewery, so knows all about brewing. And for those of you on here, know that without making beer first, we can't have whiskey. So there's a nice relationship between that. And Ned is also tasked with all of the casks, the lovely casks and things to get used in making sure that Waterford gets its right treatment and forms that final whiskey that everyone's going to be able to enjoy very shortly.
And he puts them together. He puts the bottlings together as well.
Yes, that's right. He does, and we'll talk about that.
Multitasking.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So
and enjoying it.
So Ned, I know it's past 10 in Ireland, but thank you for joining us late in the day.
No problem.
All right, so let's get started. Mark, I guess why don't you talk about the reasons that you selected A, Ireland, and B, just specifically to make a single malt in Ireland?
Yeah, well, as you know, that single malt is what interests me most of all. I think it's the apogee of spirits. Barley, the most flavoursome spirit in the world. That's accepted in its knowledge. That's science. Bruichladdich gave me the chance to put into effect some of my earlier career wine trade philosophies of provenance, and obviously with provenance goes terroir. Natural whiskey, uncoloured, unfiltered, and I had great fun doing that with Bruichladdich. It was very difficult, very hard. We had no money. We had all the baggage of the Scotch whiskey industry to drag behind you. Anything you wanted to do was frowned upon, and even my own team, it was not the way distilleries should be run. So there's a lot of baggage that went with it. So there was a lot of unfinished business when Remy came and bought out the company against my will. And so sort of really in high dudgeon, I wanted another project. I wanted to finish what we'd started and to do it really properly from day one. So I looked around in Scotland and I couldn't really find anything that remotely interested me. There are still one or two projects there, but they're just not possible, sadly. And so Ireland, which you can see from Islay, was attractive. Nothing much was going on there at the time. Back in 2012, William Grant had just bought into Tullamore. Pernod Ricard's monopoly had been broken by Cooley Distillery in Kilbeggan and then Tullamore. So things were opening up, but fundamentally it was the barley, because if you are of the opinion that provenance and terroir matter, well, then, it goes to show that obviously barley is where all that flavor originates. And wherever you can find the best barley is where to go. So that was really the biggest attraction to Ireland was the barley. And Waterford, remember, is 210 miles due south of Islay. So it's the same latitude as Cambridge, a much more benign climate, a much easier place to grow than the west coast of Scotland, where you've got a very limited growing season anyhow because of the wild climate. So it was then a question of trying to find something, a project to base it on. And as always, I think, fate intervenes, and Diageo had decided to shut down their brand new brewery, Guinness Brewery in Waterford, to consolidate into a big super brewery in Dublin. And so I went along to see that in December 2014. And, wow, what a stunning sight. Nothing to do with a sort of Hebridean romantic distillery. This is like a Formula One race car. It's power, it's technology, it's awe. It's not folksy, sort of romantic at all. It hums. It's completely the opposite to Bruichladdich, with that wonderful Victorian engineering. Remember, Bruichladdich was state of the art in 1881. It was the first official purpose-built distillery on the island. As opposed to a farm or a mill that had been adapted into a brewery. And then Bunnahabhain the same year built as state-of-the-art distilleries, which is a testament to the fact that they're still operating the same way. 140 years later. So hopefully, Waterford will be running 140 years later the way we've set it up now. So, as you said quite rightly, brewing is half of distilling. And, I had the stills, the copper, to bring to the stainless steel party. Those stills that we liberated from Allied distillers when they owned Inverleven and Dumbarton on the River Clyde. We were tipped off when that was being demolished, and were able to liberate those stills along with one or two other bits and pieces that we ran Bruichladdich on for the best part of 10 years. And those stills stood outside Bruichladdich, and I then brought them to Waterford, and we fitted them in. Took a year and a day to convert the distillery into the brewery into a distillery. And so we now have an extraordinary technological marvel of a distillery. We got stuff in it you'd never find in a distillery normally. We've got all sorts of equipment and space and more gadgets that you can shake a stick at. So during 2015, we put in place the missing link, which is the barley. I've always found it very strange that, for a whiskey, for a spirit that is so flavorsome, and that flavor comes from the barley, why it is that the industry pays no attention to the barley. I mean, there's only 3 raw ingredients, and one of those is water. Why? And of course, you have to wind the clock back a bit, back to the early 70s, when there was big consolidation in the Scottish whiskey distilleries and Irish, because remember, there was only one company owning, all the distilling in the whole of the island. It wasn't quite that bad in Scotland, where you have 80% of distillation owned by 5 companies. but that's still consolidation in a big way. And of course, efficiency was the name of the game. How to distill to produce the cheapest liter of alcohol possible. And of course, the game there was, everything you saved at that end, you could then spend on marketing at the other. And so the saying is that, for every case of spirit, whiskey, Scottish whiskey, roughly 90% of it is reinvested in marketing. So in other words, you produce a uniform spirit, and then you spin the story at the other end. You spend the money on propaganda, telling people why they should drink it, and whatever's flavor of the month, that's why you should be drinking it. The current trend is finishes. Finish it this, finish it there. Everything's a finish. But that's another get out of jail from the same era, where not only did they realize that you could consolidate distilling into a very uniform way, but you could also save a lot of money by recycling barrels many times over. And then at the last minute at bottling, you can chill filter it, and you can color it, you can stabilize the color, you can sweeten it, and that sort of meant you didn't really have to bother with the barrels. So finishing is what we've got as a result. I think is actually quite a sort of existential threat to whiskey, relying on pulling the wool over the consumer's eyes with this idea that you can finish any spirit after any number of years in a sort of barrel that will give it a sort of a faux sort of celebrity, a sort of recherche sort of pizzazz, whilst it sort of reawakens and reinvigorates a pretty tired and unimaginative spirit, because you didn't bother starting with the right wood in the first place. So
Mark, I'm gonna jump in here and just bring Ned into the conversation, because Ned, 20 years at the former brewery site. Ned, do you want to talk about what the transition was like going from brewery to distillery, and your reaction? And when I was there in March and you toured me around, I was just incredibly surprised by state-of-the-art equipment and process and everything else like that. But let's talk about your perspective on how that changed and how you adapted to it.
Yeah, so Mark, we started in 2015. So I think a year and a day after Mark bought what was the brewery, we had our first distillation. So we hit the ground running with the team that Mark put together. So basically the mash house, the brew house was there. Diageo left that there, and they just wiped all the software. So we had to get the software back up and running. Our mash filter and our hydro mill, we had all the silos there. So the stills were the big thing that had to go in. So the stills, as Mark said, came from Inverleven, that were resting in Islay for a while. So the whole process was a fairly seamless and quick process. So when we got back up and running, the team that we have there had been, a lot of people had been working there for, like myself, for 10 or 15 years previously. So we had a lot of experience with the brewery that was turning into a distillery. So with the mash filter and the hydro mill, the malted barley works really well with that. So with the hydro mill, we're basically milling underwater. It's not like your conventional Porteous or hammer roller mill. We're really milling it very tight. And when it goes into the mash filter, then it's what we call the terroir extractor. So we're extracting every last bit of liquid from that, the goodness from the barley. And at the end of the day, our whiskey, some people have tasted the new make, is very, very barley forward. So everything that we're doing at the distillery is promote the flavor from barley. And what we would say is the flavor comes from the barley, and the way we distill gives us the style of spirit. So our spirit is a light, elegant spirit. We have a very, very tight middle cut. We have an all singing, all dancing distillery. Diageo spent 40 million euros, and it's there's probes and temperature probes and pressure probes there. The one thing that's not automated is the safe. The distillers do the cut by nose and by taste. So we would have what we'd call a floating cut. So we cut very, very high. We would cut in around 66 ABV, down to about 65 and a half. So we're looking for the best quality spirit we can get. We're not looking for efficiencies. We're not looking for volume. We're looking for quality in everything that we do. So when we run our stills, as we say, low and slow, we're promoting that light spirit that when we get that tight cut, then we know when we have the barley and the spirit and the wood, that we have the best possible start to the whiskey's life, to the spirit's life. The other bit then with the wood is we have an unparalleled wood policy. We spend 40% of our overall budget on wood, which is equates to about 1 million euros a year, which is very substantial. We buy 4 cask types in general. We buy American First Fill, we buy American New, we buy French, and we buy VDN, which we call Vin du Natural. So that's the way we started off. Over the few years, we've changed that slightly to buy some French Virgins, some rum casks, and some funnies that we call it. So we can experiment with different casks. So from the very, very start, the focus is on getting the best possible spirit from the best possible barley and the best wood, putting that together. So when you get your whiskey in a week's time, Raj, and someone is tasting it, it won't be a 3 or 3.5-year-old whiskey. It'll stand up to a 10-year-old whiskey, because we're doing that. We're not finishing. We're not putting it into an Oloroso cask to finish. That'll go into an Oloroso cask first day. We don't have 4th fill, 5th fill, or 6th fill casks. We won't have those type of casks. It's all about quality. And for us, we're terroir driven under the provenance umbrella. So what we also have at the distillery is we have the 3 T's: terroir, traceability, and transparency. So we go back to the farmer and we know the day that the field was sown and everything that has happened to the day it gets into the bottle. And we can show that. There's no point in saying we can do it unless you can show it. And then when you go and you get your bottle of whiskey, you can see it on the terroir code for your bottle of Dumbell or Ratcliffe or Dunmore that you'll get, or your organic that you get in America. You'll be able to put in that terroir code and get information that's relevant to that farm or to that bottle. So it's unprecedented. We're not doing this on a small scale either. We have roughly 40 farms a year. We have conventional farmers, we have organic farmers, and we have biodynamic farmers. To date, we've used about heading towards 90 different farmers, over 150 batches. So when we started, we had Minch. We work with Minch Malt and the maltings, and they have the farmers. But what we've seen over time is that there's a generational shift. Young farmers want to get involved. Farmers are contacting us, contacting Minch Malt to get involved in this because they see that this is the story of the barley that they're producing, the barley that they can trace from their field to the bottle. And I suppose the whole project doesn't work unless we have what we call the cathedral, which is a purpose-built warehouse. Mark went up and met the Dalton brothers in 2015 and told them what we were looking for. We're looking for a facility to hold individual farms. So roughly 120 or 30 tons of barley will come into Kilkenny, into Dalton's, and that's stored there after it's dried. It's stored for a period of time. We have drying in each bay as well to make sure it's fresh. And then it goes to the Minch Malt in the Thigh. There's 2 maltsters in Ireland really. We are using Minch Malt in the Thigh. So they malt for us. Now, it's only around 100 tons of barley in comparison to the 5,000 or 10,000 tons of generic barley that other people would get malted. And they have a state-of-the-art facility. But Mark was talking about serendipity earlier on, and we have the use of their Bobby plant, which is a 90-ton malting plant, which we have the use of exclusively. So we have that. And when it comes out from the malting process, then we have 75 tons or thereabouts of malted barley. I suppose the malting process is very important as well, because if you look at terroir in grapes, the terroir is in the grapes, but you need the malting process to release the terroir for barley. So that's very important. And when that comes through into us, then we store it individually. So every farm is stored individually. It goes through the distillery individually. And we have all the records for that. We have, I think it's 8,000 data points from the day it's sown until the day it gets into the bottle. So
yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, and as Ned mentioned, that when the bottles actually arrive, and there's 3 single farm origins that are exclusive to the U.S., so they won't be found anywhere else, and you will have the opportunity to look at the back of the bottle, find the terroir code, put it in onto the website, and get more information than you ever dreamed possible, including like the farmer's dog's name and the children and the weather.
That's only a small percentage of the information we have. We can't put all the information on the terroir code because we just need to gauge how much information people want. So I think going forward, we'll probably look at levels of information. So as people will want to know, fermentation time. So we have a really long fermentation time to promote malolactic fermentations. You can look at that. You can look at, the cut points. We have all that information. It's just to see what consumers will want, what will be relevant to different consumers. So someone will want all the information about distilling. Someone else will want all the information about the farming. So we can tailor that as well. It's just to package it properly so that people are not just blown away by all the information, because there is so much.
Yeah, Mark, I wanted to ask you that's a lot of effort to find single farms, work with these single farms to source barley, then to bring the barley to the malting holding area and keep that separate, malt it separately, store it separately, distill it separately, bottle it separately, even age it separately and bottle it separately. A lot of work to prove what is all the point of this, and what are you trying to achieve by doing this?
yeah. Why are you doing it? Yeah. I mean, a lot of people say we're mad. Well, first of all, I wanted to set it up the right way, right from day one. And with Ned and Paul and all the other guys at the distillery, we were able to put this together in a way that I can tell you right now, there's no way we could have done this better. I had the satisfaction of being able to say that there is no stone left unturned. And it's a logistical issue. We didn't have those. We didn't have the logistics on either. We didn't. If there wasn't the will, there wasn't the logistics either. Here we have the logistics, and it revolves around the cathedral. Because 40 separate farms. Why 40? We're trying to make this is the units. Okay, so we're trying to make 1 million liters a year from day one. Not grow into it. From day one, so that we'll never have the problems we had at Bruichladdich of never having enough. It's all very well building sales and building a brand, but you've got to have the stocks available, and we never had the right stocks at the right time. So 1 million liters a year. How do we do that? Well, when we went to our maltsters, there are 2 maltsters in Ireland, and they're huge, but one had a defunct 1960s Bobby maltings built by Vickers. And they refurbished this and got it going. and we have the use of that. So we have sort of our own bespoke malting facility within the huge Vault Malt setup, but it needs 90 tons to operate with. So two steeping tanks of 45 tons each. So that is the unit, the magic unit, 90 tons, which means we get 75 tons malted, but it means we need 130 tons of green barley off the field. So, you know, the mass is quite straightforward. We need 5,000 tons of storage space a year. It's all harvested, remember, in a 3-week window. There are 3 lorries per farm winging their way around all these little Irish lanes. You can imagine, it's mayhem. So it all revolves around that cathedral. So each farmer can bring their barley to the cathedral. It's dried overnight to 12% humidity, which means we can then store it for as long as we want and take a breath. So each farm has its own dedicated storage. That is the key, the crux to the whole project. So we can then call on it farm by farm as we need it to distill. And it takes us roughly 10 days to ferment and distill, because it's a long temperature controlled fermentation, thanks to Diageo. And of course, our secret weapon, the terroir extractor, which is this extraordinary and unique combination of a hydro mill and a mash filter. Mash filters they're not that new, but combined with a hydro mill, it's a unique combination. And that means that instead of hammering the barley into a grist, we can take a very different approach. Now, the traditional method, the mash tun, is a percolation where hot water is dribbled through, percolated through the mass of the grist. And the grist is a very specific grinding of barley into 70% roughly flour, 20% solid bits, and then 10% husks. And that is very precise, because if it was just flour and you add hot water, every mother knows that it ends up with glue, and you'd never get the percolation through. So they need the solid bits to provide the drainage, so to speak, as each of the sequence of hot waters are added, and it percolates through and draws out the sugar into the wort. Now, a hydro mill means we can mill to 100% flour, total flour, because the milling is done underwater, and the tungsten plate can extreme mill as a result. So we don't need the 70-20-10 permutation. We can go 100% flour. So we get 100% access to what's in the barley, which is what it's all about. Now, I'd love to say that this was all foreseen and very precise and very much, but it wasn't. It was serendipitous. It was something we worked out once we got all this fancy kit going. It gives us ultimate terroir extraction, literally. So since we don't need a mash tun, we don't need to empty a mash tun. We use a mash filter, which is a press, a sequence of 40 pneumatic presses in a line. So like giant tea bags that inflate, like the same principle for squeezing grapes. We can inflate these little mini tea bags to squeeze every last drop out. So we have total wort extraction, and we have total wort pressure from the mash filter. Now this gives us a wort that is extremely heavily barley influenced. So when we ferment, again with temperature controlled fermentation, thanks to Diageo, we can extend the fermentation out to encourage a malolactic fermentation, which is very unusual in the whiskey industry. Obtaining at least 72 to 120 hour fermentations, because we know that slow fermentations produce purer flavors, and you'll see this when you taste the whiskies. You know, our motto is barley forward, terroir driven. You know, we're not mucking around. This is about barley, and we let it speak. We let it do its thing. And then without chill filtration or any of those other silly things, it's totally and utterly natural. No enzymes, no colorings, no flavorings, no nothing. It is barley. The essence of barley is what you're getting. So we want each terroir, each farm, to express itself. Now, a cynic will say, but you know, how do we know that you know the farms that you're presenting haven't been influenced by how you've processed them? Well, we thought you'd say that. So the at least initial 2 years of distillation are exactly the same. They're malted the same, fermented the same, distilled the same. Now that's partly because we were learning about what equipment we had and how to use it, and partly because we wanted to have a 0.0, that we could refer to. But subsequently, we now bespoke malt each farm, we bespoke ferment each farm, and we bespoke distill each farm, which is a hell of a lot more hassle, a hell of a lot more difficult. But we found out that not only are the flavor attributes coming from these different farms' barley, but we have to handle them differently. We've always known that season to season, harvest to harvest, you have to set up things differently for each harvest. But we never quite realized we can perfect it by setting for each farm. So years, harvests of what, 217, 218, 219, or yeah, more or less, or 218, 219, 220, I should say, have been bespoked all the way through. But harvests 215, 216, and then through 217 were uniform. So that information is available on a website via the terroir code. So you can see what we're talking about, that they are harvested, when they were fermented in this sequence. So all that information is there.
Yeah, it's interesting because, so I was just going to say, Mark, the 3 US releases we're getting all use the same barley strain, the Reynier. They were all harvested in 2015. And, you mentioned about doing all the steps separately, but you're also maturing separately. So for all of these US releases, 35% of the new make went into ex-bourbon casks, right? Right.
Well, it's roughly 50. If you think of it this way, sorry to interrupt, but if you think it's roughly 50% US oak and roughly 50% French oak, roughly. Those 3 farms of which you speak, you'll see that it may be 52%, or one of them may be 51%, or one of them may be 53%. More or less, it's 50-50 American oak. Now, in that American oak, the important thing here is the proportion of virgin American oak and first fill American oak. And there we are I think Ned has selected for each one, it's just a percentage point difference of those. And likewise with the French oak, there is no virgin French in these because we hadn't got them at the time. But that will come in subsequent bottling. So it's first fill French and what we call VDN. It's an in-house euphemism for fortified sweet wine barrels. They're the only barrels where the previous occupant is of interest to us. All the rest get sort of, obviously the bourbon, the American oak bourbon ones, but all the rest, the French oak ones get, steam cleaned. It's the oak we want, not the wine. But in this instance, the VDNs, it's the wine's sucrosity embedded in the oak that we can leach out with spirit to give a sweetness, because we don't sweeten the whiskey, we don't add coloring, or so the only sweetness is going to be derived from those VDN barrels. So it's part of the recipe. The French oak gives us a sort of buttered, grilled toast flavor, and the American oak, as you know, gives us a creme brulee, buttered, sort of caramelly flavor, and the virgin oak gives us color. So that's what we're playing with. Those are the natural ingredients to the maturing of the spirit, and we take great store by the quality of that proportion of wood. So each farm goes into 200 barrels. So if you want to visualize 130 green tons, or the equivalent 75 tons of malted barley, it works out at roughly 200 barrels. So each farm to us is 200 barrels. And Ned has the job, or the love, or the fun of selecting and playing with those barrels to create the bottlings that he wants to achieve for each one.
So that's a lot of barrels. Now, Ned, you mentioned last time how much you're spending on barrels. You want to talk about that?
5 million, yeah.
Yeah, so roughly around 1 million a year, so 5 million to date. So when we have the different spirits from the different farms, that for us is a different starting point. That goes into the casks. So each farm gets filled into 50% of American first fill, 20% American virgin, 15 French, and 15% VDN. So as I said, each farm is a different starting point, and that matures. So what we have then is each cask is an ingredient. So it may be in an Oloroso cask for 5 or 10 years, and someone may say, well, that will get too woody, or an American virgin cask. But that for me is an ingredient. So I have it's like an Aladdin's cave of casks that I can go to for each farm. And this is just a single farm we're talking about. I mentioned cuvées, where we can put a multitude of farms together. But just even the single farms, I can go and say, I'm going to put Dunmore 1.3 just with American first fill, American new, and VDN, and no French.
Permutations,
any combinations together.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it. We're not looking for a consistent bottle of whiskey. One of the things I was kind of struggling with at the start was trying to find what the Waterford style was going to be and what kind of bottlings we were going to have. And a conversation with Mark was, the farms tell you what we're doing, and you just want to have fun, and you get the bottles together that you want in what you think is good. So that was a huge freedom. Like, I came into this job wide-eyed, I suppose, like the virgin cask, a virgin to whiskey. So I was not polluted, I suppose, by the industry. I was given huge freedom by Mark to do it. Took a bit of a gamble, and hopefully when you get a bottle, you could say, listen, it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
and so each farm for us is a stepping stone to the cuvee, which will be a multitude of farms. So people have asked me, oh, what, like, if you're going to put them together, why don't you just put them together at the start? Because by keeping them separate at the start, we have options. We have unlimited options. We can do what we want. So we're not.
I mean, can I step in here, Ned? I think a way to explain that point is if you went to Chateau Latour or Chateau Lafitte or Chateau Aubryon or Chateau Margaux, what they don't do is harvest all their grapes, the 5 different grape varieties, Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, whatever, and then mix them all up in a big vat, and then ferment them, and then bottle them like that, or barrel them and bottle them like that. They don't do that. What they do is they make individual wines from each of those varieties grown on the optimum terroir around the estate, and they harvest, they vinify, they barrel separately each of the component parts to create those flavor groupings of those individual components, because it's only then that you can assemble them one on top of the other. Otherwise, it's just a mush of conflicting flavors. So that's the principle. I mean, there's cooking comparisons you could make too. Recipes that say you got to cook this in sequence and then assemble them together. And you think, okay, I'll be a smart ass and try and cut corners, and I'll just lump them all in the pot together, and it will be fine. Well, no, it isn't. You just get a sort of amorphous mass. You don't get the integrity of those flavors, the precision of those flavors. So that's why we go around separating everything out, laying down this library of component spirits, because it's only then that we can play with them and assemble them in fun and funky ways to create the different ideas, either the precision of place of a single farm or the complexity of assembling several farms with their own individual identities together to create the biggest mindfuck of a single malt whiskey that you'll ever see. And that is the goal. The goal is to produce the most profound single malt whiskey that happens to be from Ireland, because that's where the best barley is, that anybody's ever seen. It's really quite simple.
We've got a couple of questions coming in, and if anybody wants to ask a question, please put it in the chat, and I'll see if we can get to it. But Ned, you want to probably answer this one. With the fractional pressing process, is there a drift in flavor profile from start to end?
At the distilling stage?
Yeah.
So when each farm is different. So we have 20 still runs per farm. So 75 tons of malt goes into 4 thermoregulated washbacks. And that provides us with 20 still runs. So each one is slightly different. So we will start, around 76 ABV on our spirit still, and we go down to about 66 or 65 and a half, that floating cut point. So it's down to the distiller. So this is where the automation doesn't come into play. It's down to what we want to collect. We're looking for the best quality, as I said earlier on. So there will be slight changes, but that's what the farmer's given us. And we're working with that to say, this is the best quality spirit we're getting off this still run, and I'm only collecting this, and the rest can go into the low wines with the wash still to create the alchemy that happens in that, and the process repeats itself again. So when we're distilling, we're looking for balanced running. So we're offering the stills the same volumes as well, because that helps create the balanced running that we're looking for, so that each still run can be done, and the individual spirits will come through in the farm.
What about the yeast? Are you, sorry, Mark, are you using, Ned, the same yeast for each?
We use the same yeast. We use a Maori yeast. We've done a few trials with different yeasts, dried yeasts and bits and pieces, but we're focusing on the same yeast. We're using the same yeast all along. So there's no variation there. We can look at yeast maybe as in the future if we wanted, but I think we're more focused on looking at the barleys, going back to 1900s or thereabouts. We have some heritage grains, as we call them, Goldthorpe from 1900, Hunter from 1956. So we're looking at flavors from that rather than maybe flavors from
yeast is very interesting. The wine industry has played a lot with yeast, but I think it's a very different impact for the vine, because you've got a lot of different clones. You've got 30 different clones of Chardonnay, 30 different clones. So yeast for wine is very, very relevant. I'm not convinced for distilling purposes that it is. I mean, the experiments we've done to date, it's a bit of a broad brushstroke. We're finding that, first of all, the flavor compounds in the barley, we just want to see them as they are. The idea was that once we've got to grips with that, we could then play with the yeast. But actually, I think we're probably going to jump further. What we're going to do, and because we've been, all the experimentations we've been doing with the University of Cork and Dustin Herb from the University of Oregon on barley flavor, is looking at the barley flavors when flavor mattered. Going back to that sort of early 70s, when most of the barley varieties of today were propagated for yield rather than flavor. So if we go back to before then, so back to the early 60s, there was a lot greater diversity of barley flavor than in the last 40 years. And so by growing heritage barleys from 1960, 1900, and the Middle Ages, we can identify, or are looking to identify, which varieties and which flavors are more interesting, and perhaps we can then propagate our own varieties based on flavor rather than yield. So that's, we're going to jump the gun. We're going to go into a much more interesting development. At yeast, we've got all the equipment to do it. But I think it interested me a great deal at the outset. It interests me less today.
Mark, you mentioned that originally the 2015, 2016 harvests were kept separate to have consistency. But you also mentioned about future ones being bespoke. What changes were made, and how can a single farm distillation be bespoke?
Well, Ned will tell you, middle cuts. Okay, Ned, you carry on.
Yeah, so I suppose the middle cut is one place, but if we go back to the very start, at the malting stage, each farm is malted on the individual results. So that's where it's starting. Now when we talk about bespoke, it's not just the distillation. So the farm is tested and it's malted on the results. When it comes into us, then it would have different gelatinization temperatures. So Neil, the head brewer, would have to make small adjustments to temperatures for that farm to get the most out of that. The stand times slightly change when it goes into the fermentation. Then we would have we don't have the exact same fermentation times. We go on what the fermentation is telling us. So at each different stage now, there's a bespoke element to that. Whereas before, it was very, it was just a repeatable process. We tried to keep it as repeatable as possible to show that the spirit that was going into the cask and was going to make whiskey was done the same way. Then when we get to distillation, then it is that middle cut where we float with that, where in 2015 and 2016 barley, we probably, we definitely in 2015, we had to find our feet. So we had different cut points. The stills had to be ran in as such. So we were probably a good few months finding where we were comfortable with the flavors and the spirit. So we went down as low as maybe 64 on some of the cut points. So it probably took us a good few months to get to a point where we were happy with this is the style of spirit that we wanted. This is roughly where we want to make the cuts. And then we hit on where we were making the cut. So we didn't go below 66 ABV, even though we could, but we just wanted that the best quality. We didn't want any hint of feints at all. So now we're just
so it's a very miserly middle cut, a very miserly middle cut, and that's the only rule that Ned was given. It was that we want a miserly middle cut, and wherever that middle cut is, wherever it occurs, it's the same margin. So we're not infringing in the feints, and we're not infringing in the foreshots or the heads or the tails, for purity purposes. So you could argue we're shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to yields, because we are deliberately leaving on the table, and we worked this out recently, we're deliberately leaving on the table at least 60,000 litres of alcohol a year by following that policy. Now, if you add in the heritage barleys, if you add in the biodynamic and the organic barleys, we are foregoing deliberately at least 120,000 litres a year. Now, that's almost as much as some distilleries distill in a year. And we're choosing not to take it because we're after the quality and we're after the character. So it's a deliberate decision.
25% of our distillation, our farms now are non-conventional. So heritage, biodynamic or organic, which is huge. And I suppose one of the other things we've seen from the Terroir project as well, Raj, is that the current barley varieties are very, very closely related. They have the same parentage or same lineage. So they're like brothers or sisters. So back pre kind of 1950s, they were just bred without yields and that involved. So nowadays there's probably a 4 or 5 year period before you can get accepted as being a malted barley. Some of the things that they would be looking for is straw length. Can the straw stand up? Will it fall over? What kind of a yield will have? Pesticides. So that's kind of what the industry was kind of looking at. I suppose we're kind of looking at something slightly different now, in that we kind of have a voice and we want to start looking at varieties for distilling if we can. But
I was going to ask that. So far, the different barley strains that you've used, what I'm hearing that is that you haven't noticed a discernible difference in those barley strains because they all have same lineage.
In the Terroir project that we're undertaking for the last 3 years, we were surprised how little of an impact the barley variety was having. It was so we've done it in 2 sites, Athy in the Midlands and Clody in Wexford, with 2 varieties, and we're just seeing that they're having less of an impact than expected. And the same then when we break that out into the single farms. We're looking at a number of farms over the years, and we have spider diagrams that we're placing on top of each other, and you can see the actual influence from the soil, from the terroir, and from year to year, there's subtle differences because no year is the same, but the same DNA is there. So if we go to an Elton soil series or a Clanroach soil series or a Seafield soil series, they have a distinctive DNA coming through from the
and
soil.
Harvest influenced as well.
Yeah. And also in Ireland, no field is the same. We don't have a huge amount of flat fields. So we have fields that are undulating. So a field that has a dip in it will hold the water more. So even in one field, there'll be influences in that field.
Yeah, you talked about, Mark, I asked you this last time we were chatting about the three different farms, single farms that were selected for the U.S.
Yeah.
And you mentioned one of the, I mean, aside from the fact that it's the same barley strain and the same year of harvest, you mentioned that all three farms sat on the same latitude
more or less.
or soil basis.
So each of the three farms, if you take Waterford on the south coast and north, east, the west, due north, and north, east, that's where they're situated, almost on a line. So it's, you asked me why we chose them. We didn't choose them for any particular reason. Each one happens to be the origin of a fort in the Middle Ages. So you've got Big Fort, Edge Fort, and what was the other one?
Stone Fort.
Stone Fort, that's right.
Stone
Fort. So one's on the edge of an escarpment. The other one was obviously at the time was built of stone, and the third one is Big Fort. So the names are all historic names of a wild and crazy time in Ireland's history. And then you've also got the organic, which is coming to you as well. But yes, so it's coincidence they happen to be the same barley variety. But what we have found in those experiments is, whilst there's not a great deal of difference between varieties, there is a difference between the same variety grown on different terroirs. So that is interesting. So there is a terroir influence rather than a varietal influence. So I think the future of developing our own barley varieties is quite an exciting one. I think of it as a sort of greatest flavor hits. You know, it offers a lot of really interesting ideas, but that's obviously going to take a long time, and we're you know, we've got a lot on our plate at the moment. But that's all running in the background. So this autumn, we will be releasing the results of the first 3 years study, the terroir study, which will show to the world that we're not just making this up. This has been verified and peer reviewed and studied. We can show you it technically, we can show you it olfactorily, and of course you can taste it for yourselves. So it's unequivocal. And this obviously is going to upset quite a lot of people. There's people that are very happy in their little world of what they know. And we've basically taken the pin out of a grenade and we've lobbed it in there. So some people love it, some people hate it, some people just don't get it. But this is done because we are curious about barley. We are curious about whiskey. We love it and we want to know more. We're having great fun exploring, and we want people to come with us on that journey. But we equally quite understand that there are people for whom this is too much. Fine.
Yeah. So on that note, Mark, what has been the reaction of your comrades in distilling in Ireland, and not only Ireland but also Scotland as well? But
well, they're
Ireland
all watching.
They're
all watching very close, and you know, all the trade people are watching very close, because they're saying, you know, what's this bloke up to now? And you know, what you've probably deduced is that we set this up in a bulletproof way. We took exceptional attention to detail with traceability, because our industry is a propaganda industry. People bullshit like there's no tomorrow. And I know full well that the criticism will be, well, you say that, but... So, you know, because we encountered that in Brooklady days, and we encountered a lot of hostility from the industry. What's been very interesting this time round is there hasn't been any direct ad hominem attack, and I think it's because they know that we're right, and and the thing is, we took the steps to be able to prove it. So a bit like a sort of Roman battalion, in a testudo. We've protected ourselves like an armadillo by making it, our credo, which is our Waterford understanding of what real provenance is, as Ned said, the 3 T's. To have real provenance, you need a terroir. It's no use having the terroir unless you can prove it, which is the traceability. And it's no use having the traceability all to yourselves unless you can demonstrate it, which is transparency. So to us, real provenance is terroir plus traceability over transparency. And that, it is what it is. So when you taste these whiskies, when you compare and contrast one farm with another, don't take my word for it. Try it yourself, and you'll see. And it's great fun. And the nuances, the subtleties. It's not wham bam in your face. But you don't have to look too hard either. You can test it in a tasting glass, sure, or you can have it in a jolly good tumbler. Tumbler, is that a word? Tumbler. And just take your time and relax and have fun.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's, despite what we've been talking about, it's for drinking and enjoying and sharing, which is how whiskey is drunk, really. It's not drunk by sort of, finicky little people in a lab. It's drunk at home, where people have the time to enjoy and share and discuss and argue and debate. That's what we've done. We've put that on the table for people to do it themselves. And if you're not interested in doing it, well, don't. Either hoover it down or just don't buy it. But if you are remotely curious, well, then where else can you go? So your original question to me was what did the industry think? Well, what I think is more relevant is what has the whiskey drinker thought? And put it this way, in the 5 European markets that we went into and the 2 Asian markets that we went into, our distributors sold out in entirety within 3 hours. And I think the testament is that whilst we in the industry can talk ourselves round and round and round about whether this is relevant or not, the big guys would like to tell you that it isn't, because they've got to protect their homogeneity. And the artisanal guys will say, oh yes, but it is. But remember, we're not playing at this. We're doing 1 million litres a year. We're doing 200 barrels per farm. This isn't small scale. This is quite serious scale. Artisanal approach, but serious scale. So what I think we've demonstrated in Europe and certainly in Asia is there is a thirst for knowledge. People do want to know more. And it's only the industry that stopped them by talking about what? Talking about finishes, talking about sort of whatever propaganda thing they can think of next. So, a barrel here, a barrel there, or, they're not talking about what really matters, where the real flavor comes from, what makes whiskey, which is barley. Okay, I can tell you right now, over the next few years, you're going to see lots of propaganda images of waving fields of barley, just like the beginning scenes of Gladiator, and lots of people talking about, their own farm, their, this, that, the other. But I mean, that's just, smokescreen stuff. What we've done cannot be repeated and is unlikely to be repeated by anybody else, because it is so comprehensive and so compelling, with a vision that we have driven home without leaving anything unturned, any stone unturned. So, I think the fact that this is, has been so well received by wine drinkers, because of course they understand those concepts, by whiskey aficionados, because they are thirsty for knowledge and they want to know more, is a testament to the lack of interest or the lack of information out there, real information, and that sweet, sickly sort of smokescreen of propaganda that tends to surround our industry, much to the shame, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I
Does that
saw.
make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I saw in the news feed today, the industry news feed, that Belvedere is going down their vodka terroir concept, and they just released a new Heritage 176 release, which goes back to malting rye to make the vodka. But they're one of the few vodka producers that have been on a
there's
terroir
going to be a
basis.
lot of people. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to jump on bandwagons, and sadly, and I warn you now. The word terroir is going to be corrupted beyond belief, and I find that slightly embarrassing, because it's going to be because of me that it will get corrupted, because it's too easy to corrupt by a very slick industry, because there is no direct English translation of the term. So therefore, it's open to misunderstanding, deliberate or otherwise. And so the word is going to get, what do they call it? Cultural appropriation. It's going to be culturally appropriated by all and sundry. Because it sounds sophisticated and you don't actually have to do anything. You can just bandy the word around a bit and sound terribly sophisticated. And this is a great shame. This is a great shame.
If you hear someone saying that terroir is where the stills are, run a mile. It's exactly nothing to do where the stills are.
Terroir can only be about the subsoil, the soil, the bedrock, the microclimate, the interaction of all these things on how that barley plant or vine grows. It's not about how the wine is made or the barley is distilled. It's how that plant grew, and those influences in a three-dimensional nature affect how it grows, whether it was a dry harvest or a wet summer, or whether the fields are exposed, where the evapotranspiration is high, where the soil retains moisture or is bone dry, it's acid or it's alkali, it's high in nutrients, it's low in nutrients. All these things impact how that plant grows. That's terroir. It's a 3D interaction between all those things. It's not a person. It's not a county. It's not a department. It's not a distillery. It's where that barley grew. And a terroir can be absolutely minuscule, the size of a tennis court, or it can be the size of a large field. But it's not a person, and it's not as Ned says, a distillery. This is where it's going to get abused. It's going to get abused by people that don't really understand it, because it's just too easy. It's too easy for them. So in fact, we're going to move on from terroir. We're not even going to talk about it.
Yeah, actually, Raz, when you were just asking about how it's been received, the transparency side for us. So we have a bespoke built system, built by Cian Duran, that captures all the data, and people have come in and have seen that and have seen everything we're doing. Like you'll see on your terroir code, you'll see the average hours sunlight when the crop was in the ground for Dunbell or Dunmore or Rathcroft or the organic. So we have all that information. So there wasn't a system out there that could capture it all. So we had to build one to capture all the information. So when people are challenging us or saying, this is not right, or what about that, we can say,
go and look it up. Yeah,
it is, and we can show you. And we've had lots of people in from the industry. Lots of people have come in and we're very open and very transparent in leaving people in. And when they see it and they kind of go quiet for a second, they know we're not bullshitting. We're saying what we're doing.
Yeah. Here, Mark, here's an interesting question from Ben. on a scale of 0 to mindfuck, where do you feel Waterford spirit exists today, and how do you anticipate the whiskey will evolve in the coming years?
Yeah, well, that's obvious. I can't possibly say. Yeah. But I think it's, we learned this at Bruichladdich. I don't believe there is any shortcut to whiskey making. People have tried, and they've played music at maturing barrels. They've matured them in space. Whiskey in space. They've matured them underwater. They ultrasounded them. They've done all sorts of things. There is no real shortcut. You need premium wood that has not been exhausted by overusage. You need a balanced approach to the different influences of that wood. And of course, that old chestnut that is so often used, that 80% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the wood. Well, no, it doesn't. It's actually 100% of a whiskey's flavor is influenced by its time in wood. Yes, that's more true because of the micro-oxygenation that occurs through the wood. And the spirit does extract the tannins, the lignins, the vanillins, which are flavor compounds from the wood and the color. But that happens very quickly and from fresh wood. If the wood has been used 2 or 3 times, that doesn't really happen. But what does happen is the micro-oxygenation through the wood from the day that spirit is put in that barrel. And that carries on, right the way through. So it's true to say that 100% of a whiskey's flavor is influenced by its time in wood, because that micro-oxygenation is changing, adapting in infinitesimally small doses the original spirit flavor. Now, if the flavor of that spirit is non-existent when it went in, well, it can micro-oxygenate away and nothing's going to happen. So, for example, if you take neutral spirit, industrial spirit, and put it in a barrel, you don't get whiskey. You get a very bitter, tannic, horrible drink. The flavor has to be there in the spirit in the first place. And we get that flavor from the barley. So if it's not there, nothing's going to happen. So it's a marriage of the two things together. It's not just the wood. It's not just the barley. It's the barley extracted flavors in the spirit that the barrel allows to change over time. So we have found that if you use premium wood, if you use premium barley, if you distill very slowly and miserly, well, then it's no surprise that the spirit presents itself very good at a very early stage. We showed that with Octomores and Port Charlottes, at Bruichladdich. So the fact that these spirits are 4 years of age, and you'd swear blind they were 10, is actually no surprise to me. So what I think the answer to your question is, if they're this good now, how are they going to be when they are 10? Well, I can't prophesy that, but I can tell you I'm a very happy bunny, because that evolution is just going to carry on.
Can I just come in there for a second, Mark, and just say, as Ben was asking about 0 to mindfuck, so each farm is at different points. So not every single farm will get released at this stage, at an early stage. A farm might take a little bit longer to develop and be a point where we're ready to release it on quality. So it's a bit like someone, if you're playing sports, not everyone on the team is at the same point, but it will get there. It will get there. But so not everything is at the same point at the moment. So it's interesting. There's 1 or 2 farms where definitely one farm where I was really excited about the spirit of saying this is going to make 3 years in a day. I'll get this out, and it just needs a little bit longer. Now I tasted it there the other day, and it's just coming up to 4 years, and it's ready to go. So you just have to give the farm its own time
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But like at
Sure.
3 years or 4 years, the excitement is already there.
Yeah.
And
Well,
remember, you know, we've distilled suitable volumes that we can revisit these farms over the years to come. So we can revisit Dunbell, its first harvest, over several years as it matures. So you can find out yourself what happens. You know, so it's not just us telling you. You can follow this because we'll do a Dunbell 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. The two digits, the first digit referring to the harvest, the second digit referring to the bottling. So 2015 harvest, we can revisit over, you know, a decade. So you can actually see for yourself how it's evolved. If you're still alive.
Mark, sorry, we have about 10 minutes left. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please post it in the chat area. I just wanted to briefly, we didn't have a chance last time, but I want to touch on organic and the organic Gaia that's going to be released. And obviously there isn't not enough organic barley that came from one farm to be able to supply this. So you had to source it from a number of different farms, I think 4 or 5. What were some of the challenges with that, and how do you think the organic differentiates from single farms?
Well, look at the sky there. Look, we've got a nice sky.
Beautiful.
This must be the sky coming your way. This is coming your way.
We're getting a hurricane, so hopefully it's not that.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll stand there.
It's a beautiful sunset.
You can ride it. Organic. Now, I had the privilege of being involved in the Burgundy vineyards and Alsace vineyards during the 80s and the 90s when the organic and biodynamic movements really started taking off. So I was able to see and witness firsthand the relevance of those two viticultural techniques. And I reiterate again, you know, being a farmer in the biodynamic or organic regime doesn't necessarily mean you're a great winemaker, or, you know, it's farming. It's how you're producing your primary material. And I observed that those that were more fastidious in following those regimes ended up with soils that were more enriched naturally. They were more living. The plants were more naturally disease resistant. It's like people with taking antibiotics. You know, if you have too many antibiotics, your immunity is very low, and it's the same with plants too. And that it was no surprise in the cellar they actually were good at winemaking. So I made the first organic single malt whiskey in Scotland with Bruichladdich. I think there's 2 other distilleries that also do that now. And the first ever biodynamic, although it was with English grown barley. So I wanted to do the same thing because I'm convinced about the qualitative differences. We're not doing it for fun. It's a lot more expensive to do. It's a lot more difficult because everything has to be signed off and certified. You know, from the lorries that carry it to the offloading, to the barrels, to the bottling. You know, it's a real pain up the arse. So you don't do it for the hell of it. You've got to be convinced. And the first farmers we were able to convince, I mean, they just didn't have enough for that magical. You remember I told you the 90 tons into the dedicated Bobby maltings, which is the equivalent of 130 tons. Nobody grew 130 tons of organic barley. In fact, nobody in Ireland grew biodynamic barley at all. So I had to take some of those organic farmers to France and show them all about biodynamics. And we now have 2 full farms biodynamically. We now have 3 full farms organically, and we have 1 farm's worth, i.e. 130 tons, that comes from my battery's going to that comes from the original small farmers who just don't have enough land to make that 130 tons. So the first barley, the first organic you're getting is from that initial bunch of heroes. I think it's 5 farmers that grew organically.
It's actually six in 2015.
Yeah, and so they were put together. So that's the only it's the only whiskey we have made from an mixed batch of barley. It's the only one, and that's out of necessity. So why do we do it? We do it because the flavor is there, and you will see it's different. Barley forward, terroir driven. Well, this is barley forward. It really is very malty, and I think that reminds me. If someone said, "Well, how do you taste Waterford in a blind tasting?" It would be that maltiness, that barleyness that comes forward. I think that's probably the way you'd identify it most readily. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I believe so. It was there. Scott wants to know how many bottles will be in each release and how many barrels from
that's
each.
on the website again.
Yep.
The terroir code. I think from memory, Ned, you might know better, but I think that the 3 single farms, is it sort of 8,000 bottles of each?
Well, Rathclough, Dunmore are about 13,000.
Right.
13,000.
The organic, I think, it will be about 6,000, and Dunville is going to be about 6,000, I think, off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
And that's the first bottlings.
That's the first bottling.
Yeah, because I remember we increased it was going to be half of that, and based on the demand in Europe, we increased it.
I think the second bottling we're gone up to about 15,000 on Rathclough and Dunmore, and about 10,000 on Dunbell.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, and I think it's just the start of a journey that is going to be expressed in a lot of different ways. I want to thank Ned and Mark for joining us this evening. And Ned, it's probably well past Ned's bedtime, so he needs.
Oh yeah, I need my beauty sleep.
And I think that I want to thank all of you for joining us, and hopefully we were able to
for listening to all this,
pique your interest and get you excited about this.
It's
and
not that complicated,
right?
It's not.
I certainly can't. Yeah, I for one can't wait for our first shipment to arrive next week, or this week, or next week, and then get it shortly thereafter out to the consumers who are long anticipating this.
And as I said the last day, if there's any questions or anyone wants to know anything, Raj, they can send them to you, or they can send them to us at the distillery. We'll gladly answer anything.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone, and safe evening. Enjoy the rest of your night.
I just want one last thing, Raj, is remember, after the travel, remember these are natural whiskies, so they'll need time to just calm down after the journey. Yep. So do give them some space. Let them just settle for a few days before you attack them. Still water, spring water is always a good idea. You can drink them neat if that's your kick, but actually you'll get more flavor from them if you add a little bit of spring water. Ideally avoid the ice cubes if you want to really see that flavor. Cool spring water is fine, but enjoy. It's there to be enjoyed.
Well, cheers everyone.
Cheerio, man.
Right.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
We'll just hang tight. If anybody wants to ask a question, I can open it up and unmute you. I'll unmute whoever's left if anybody wants to ask Ned a question.
Most of them are gone, Raj, I think, are they?
Yeah, I think they are. All right, Ned. Well, I'll let you go as well.
No,
And
Bob, listen, thanks very much, Raj, and we will talk to you in the future.
yeah, take care.
Send on a few pictures when the whiskey lands.
I certainly will. Yeah.
Thanks. Night, everyone.